you're well this... Oh, it's a dark and frosty evening here. I'm not sure where in the world you all are today. So we're going to have an all Aviendha all the time kind of evening today, which I'm not sure how to start this because she doesn't like it when I read her work first or last. But it's all Aviendha, so you have to be both. Sorry, darling. Yeah, we're gonna open up with the There Was Only One Escape Pod. Hello, sweetheart. Which is it was written, I think, for the Raylo Dry Humpalooza event, which was really good fun. And it's sweet and it's sexy and more emotional than something about dry humping, you would think. No sound. Oh, that's fun. No sound. Just sat here talking to myself. Why is there no sound? Why is there no sound? Microphone on. What microphone are we using? Oh, it's your phone. Okay. Beg pardon all. I'm just a bit emotional. So I guess you'll a lot of you will be getting ready for sort of turkey things and stuff. Not very. I think that's me not being very loud, actually. 1 second. Let me see if I can adjust my levels to make up for the fact that I'm a bit quiet today. Is that any better? Better. Okay. Right. So yeah, we're going to try and read through There Was Only One Escape Pod. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the form back up. I think people were a little bit more comfortable putting their details on a form than they were talking to me like a person. I think it's better if they don't think I'm a person. So yeah, I'm going to put the form back out for Saturday and see if that helps any, although I'm aware it will be likely quiet on Saturday because of the holiday in the States. So we shall see, because that is the other reason that it is quiet. Okay. Bum bum bum. Aviendha's just setting up for mobile and she is the only one here. I'm basically just reading to her, so I'm going to talk to myself. Okay. She says, I mean go, but I'm just getting ready. It gives me a chance to check my levels and stuff, so I've caught the stitching on my Udi and now it has a hole. There's a hole in my Udi, dear Liza, dear Liza. Boom. So we'll go with linking work in the chat. And we are going to read through our tags. There Was Only One Bed, Frottage, Alternate Universe, Canon Divergence, Post Star Wars, The Last Jedi, Raylo Dry Humpalooza 2024, Dry Humping, That Gets a Little Wet, Make Love Like War. Those are some lovely tags, Aviendha. The escape pod could barely hold the two of them, but Ray was just overjoyed with having convinced Ben Solo to join her and leave the First Order behind. Taking his hand had turned him around, after she'd pulled on him and he'd relented. There's nothing here for you, for us. Nothing real. Red-headed General Hux walked in on them and saw the mess, called him a traitor, shot at them, almost hitting her, and Ben killed him, just broke his neck with the force, then walked over to his old master's body, grabbed something from his severed hand, marched over to take her hand and led her to a secret exit. They ran down a long corridor to a door he unlocked with an object, a ring he had pilfered from the corpse. The hatch opened and he pushed her in and then waited, looking at her intently. "Of course, you idiot," she answered the unasked question in his eyes as she moved further in so he could squeeze in with her. Now the two of them inside, the hatch door closed and the pod was expelled into the black void outside. Through a small port window they saw a catastrophe. The Supremacy split asunder, half the First Order fleet decimated in one fell strike. They had escaped by the grace of the Force. For a full minute, neither said anything. Then Ben said, "It will probably take a while for them to recuperate and regroup from that, but I'm sure someone will take command. Probably Pride or Nis." "Did they stop firing on the Resistance?" The inside of the pod had minimal controls. It was large enough to contain Snoke in an emergency, and some supplies, and a control and communications console. She saw Ben tap the port window to zoom in on the space where the Resistance transports were still headed to the Red Planet further out. They watched, waiting. No more hits were fired on them. He zoomed out and panned to see what the First Order was doing. It was an angry wasp hive of ships scurrying about. Quickly, Ben tapped some controls. "I've deactivated the distress beacon," he told her. "I don't want the First Order to find us." "Right." "This little pod has maybe a few days' rations, rudimentary accommodations, and a sublight drive that should take us to the planet's orbit where we can make landfall. It'll take us a few hours to get there if we don't want to attract attention." He punched the coordinates in the control panel, gave the tiny pod the slightest acceleration impulse, just enough to get them going in the right direction, then cut off the engine. Now they drifted in space like flotsam, small and quiet among the debris, with only the slightest linear motion. The space they were in was claustrophobic, at least for Ben. Ray had been trapped in much more uncomfortable situations, hiding from thugs in tiny cubholes on board the great wrecks of Jakku. Ben was sweating. Ray wrapped her arms around him, a reassuring gesture, and he held on to her in return. "They'll all be so happy to have you back." "You think so? After everything I did?" He looked away at her, then, uncertain, face smooth to control emotions she could feel emanate from him. He trembled. Before he could berate himself any further, she persisted. "You just beheaded the First Order. You broke free." Ben said nothing, looking at the red sphere in the distance, considering their next move. They were both grimy, bruises aching. He looked for and found a water spigot, pulled the tube out and drank from it, then offered it to her. She took a few swallows. Water! The space wasn't large enough to pace in, barely wide enough to stretch his arms. It was a smaller even than the lift they'd brought them before Snoke. Ray turned and he saw the burn on her shoulder. "Oh, let me patch that up for you," he told her. Rummaging around, they found back to patches and clean wipes. Ben helped her first, cleaning and covering the wound on her shoulder before inspecting her for other injuries. His hands were gentle as he wiped the damp cloth across her forehead and cheeks. Satisfied, he let her do the same for him. When he was done, he took off his light armoured tunic, apologising for feeling too warm. There were no visible wounds on him, but Ray was very impressed with his muscular build and let him know. "You're very fit, you know that?" He blushed and turned away. "Yeah, thanks." Surprised by his discomfort, Ray thought to distract him. "How long do you think until we make it?" she asked him. "A few hours at least, but then when we reach the planet, the pod's communication equipment should work well enough. We have credits too, in case we make it to one of the main cities." Ray considered his words for a moment. "We could disappear," just you and I. Agape, he looked down at her, his eyes softened. Would you do that? I think we did our part, don't you? Now he smiled at her. He smiled. The breath went right out of her. She blushed bright red, turned her face away, luminous. Ray, he started, hesitated, then maybe we did. Now we wait. Let's rest, sleep if we can. It's a good way to pass the time when stuck in a hole like this. Alright, I'll just set the sensors to warn us. He shifted the gravity to angle it so they were lying down instead of standing like they had been when they walked in. They settled down. Ray fell asleep in the comfort of Ben's embrace. Kylo woke sometime later, his arms pins and needles. Artificial gravity was below 1G, but enough to keep their stomachs in place and feel the girl's weight on him. He carefully removed his arm and she sighed and turned away but stayed asleep. The next thing he noticed was his erection. He wasn't exactly surprised. The girl's proximity, her beauty, her smell, her power all excited him. But he was annoyed that he couldn't do much about it, but breathe and try to meditate the thing away. He closed his eyes to try to distract himself from the sight of her, right there beside him, but other images wandered into his mind. He imagined her body like when he'd masturbated in his quarters just 2 days ago. Her pert little breasts. He looked at her, the curve of her arse. It was a gorgeous arse. She was a bit thin, but she was muscular, with wide hips that seemed made to accommodate him. Her shoulders too, her back, everything. He placed a hand over himself and squeezed. That was a mistake. He let out an involuntary grunt. He woke and turned toward him. He took his hand away. The bump in his pants was rather evident there. So Ray moved up to him and kissed him. Ben was so surprised he didn't even react. I'm sorry, she said, pulling back. I thought... No, wait. He pulled her in again and kissed her back right on those sweet pink lips of hers, plush and willing. They parted and he looked in her eyes, hardly believing his circumstance. Now she smiled. Now he smiled again. What are you doing to me, Ray of Jagu? He asked, bewildered. We won. I want my reward. You're that much, huh? Can't you feel it, the force of our bond? That's just the force moving us together, like pawns. You don't believe that. I don't believe that, she told him, brows creased together like when she was angry at him. What he couldn't believe was that the powerful light user he'd picked up in Takodana could move him so deeply and not immediately destroy him. He warned her, you can only regret this in the long run. You begged me to join you, remember? He had, but that was with power and a whole fleet. This was different. Things were turning into an entirely different scenario now. But now you came with me. Will you regret it, the fugitive life? He sputtered. All right, I get it. She moved back. There wasn't far to go, but it would still take time to get there. Kylo lay there feeling stupid. Fuck it, she said. Moved back toward him, half climbed over him to kiss him again. I'll take what I can. There was no fighting her. He kissed her back, sweet kisses like wine, like wild honey. It was all he could do to lay there, to give himself up to her. He'd killed its master for her. She'd saved his life, his soul, so he let her kiss him. Deep, hungry kisses now, challenging his self-control. Let her run her hands over him. Explore him. From her breathing, he got the impression she was inexperienced, and yet her desire for him was all-consuming, overwhelming. The space between them was filled with it. It was threatening to loose the beast inside him. She ran her free hand over his chest, his stomach, cooing appreciatively. She stopped her kisses only to tell him, "Touch me, Ben. I want you to." He barely took the time to take his gloves off before he cupped her breast, small and pert like he dreamed that he would be, almost reflectively. He sucked on her lip. She bit him and moved back. He opened his eyes to see her nod apologetically, not rejecting him, just filled with a desire she didn't know how to express. "I don't know what to do." "You're doing it right," he told her. "It's a lot for me too." "You've never—" "Yeah, but it's been a long time. Years." Years, he thought, as if getting all the sex he ever wanted when he joined the dark. He had tired of it and had wanted something else and waited. Waited for her. Sorry, Lude, we don't do AI. I don't care if you've taken a prompt and turned it around. No way, mate. My fat ass was on the front of the New York Times saying no to AI. We don't do AI. Sorry, babe. Maybe Rave Jackie had waited for him, and now she was done waiting. She reached her hand lower, found his bulge, and squeezed him through the breeches. He grunted. Here they were, stuck in a tiny pod on their way to the Resistance, maybe. He could just tear all her clothes off and fuck her. Wait, calm down. He breathed through his nose, exhaled through his mouth. He looked at Ray. She was looking at the bulge she was rubbing at over his breeches, frowning, smiling softly. Then she looked right at him. "Does this feel good?" How is she so earnest? He felt the lust that was building in his loins suddenly lurch and follow his blood to his chest, to his heart. Something bigger than lust was building there. "Ray," he breathed, eyes flickering between hers in wonder. "What are you doing to me?" he asked again. "Don't be afraid. I feel it too." He certainly felt something as she rubbed him through his clothes, grasping him. He reflexively parted his thighs, and she reached lower to cup his testes with a gentle hand, then back to his cock. It was pleasure. He closed his eyes to enjoy the vulnerability. "It's big," she whispered, making him throb. The pleasure increased, and he realised how sensitive he was. He had to stop her. He reached into her wonderful hair and undid the clasp, still holding it, guarded it through his fingers before pulling her close for better kisses until he felt her moan. His hand felt the skin over her breasts, and he caressed it before finding and pulling at her breastband. She let him. He pulled it down to reveal a breast and a nipple. He grasped it between thumb and finger, rolling it once, then held it gently. His mouth watered, and he broke the kiss. "Ben." A soft moan. She shifted, signalling a change in position. He let her move to lie on her back, giving him control. He covered her, careful not to crush her underneath his greater mass. He was giving the kisses now, on her lips, but also her cheeks, her nose, her eyes, her throat. Just as she'd woken his flesh, he caressed her with intent. He used his free hand to uncover her other breast, and looked at her just in time to see her nod at him. Encouraged, he scooched down to kiss her breasts. Then lay his head on her chest and suckled on his dyad's half-breast, hand grasping the soft flesh of the other one, heart beating in his ear. He was reuniting with skin and softness and woman, with life. She put her hand over his head, rooting around in his thick curls, finding and tracing the shell of his too big ear. She was gentle about it, a caress. Trapped in this little pod in space, crate growing bigger in the porthole window, freed from Snoke, from the Knights of Ren, from the First Order. "You're safe now," she promised him. So he cried. continued her caresses. Sometime later, when he was calm again, he found something to wipe his nose with and saw she'd cried too. "I'm sorry," he started. "I know." Kisses resumed. The desire had only been submerged with a wave of released emotions, but it was surging again. Maybe it felt freed from guilt, from shame, from grief. It was his turn to caress and wake her flesh. He teased her bared breasts, then felt her muscled flanks, complimenting her, those wide hips, those muscled thighs, that washboard stomach. He found the hem of her leggings and slid his hand under it, and over her mons, and she let him, her hands twisting curls in his hair when he reached her own patch of hair. He pet her little bush for a moment, giving her time to relax her thighs, then pushed further between her legs until he felt her warm moisture. He barely stopped his hand, feeling the urge to push fingers inside her, to pump them, to retrieve the flowing juices, to taste them, to taste her. She trembled, and he looked at her. There was doubt. "Do you have a contraceptive?" he asked her. She shook her head no. This pod was not the place to take her, to make her his. He looked out of the window, planet fall, in maybe an hour. They may be separated then, but maybe he could give her a better sense of his growing affection for her. He retreated his hand and resumed kissing and being kissed. Lude, let me finish the story I'm reading and then we'll have a chat about it, okay, mate? Yet he was still seduced by her. He rubbed her over her clothing now. He could give her that. She sighed with relief, tension fading from her face to be replaced by something more pleasant. Her hand searched and found him there against her thigh, gave him a squeeze, and then her other hand grasped his shoulder, pulled him over her. He had a flash of memory of playing games with Vogue, Jedi Academy, defying Luke's interdiction, sweaty and ignorant in the bunk of his little hut. Vogue both wanted him and hated him, biting him as they made out until Luke caught them. He snapped his attention back to the woman underneath him, spread wide and grasping in his arms, full of want and affection for him. For him. Luke was not here. He could take his time, could tame her little beast and control his own. There'd be no fucking this time. He pressed his cock over her core and moved over her and heard her sigh, her eyes almost rolling back in her head. "Sssss," she whispered, angling her legs for better contact. This would be enough. He lay fully on her, feeling her warmth through the cloth between them, feeling her heartbeat with his own. Softly, then more firmly, he rubbed up and down her core. She wanted this. She reached out between them and lifted his undershirt to touch his skin, feel his chest, then pushed her breastband further out of the way, inviting him to touch skin to skin. He lay down again, feeling the contact, the intimacy of it. She reached behind him and caressed his back, his flank, his buttocks, bidding him to continue to rub over her. She was giving what she could. She closed her eyes and he his, and the pleasure mounted between them until that wondrous connection opened, and our feelings and sensations bled from one to the other. He had to slow down his motion to adapt. He could feel both her immediate pleasure and the frustration at the impossibility of consummation equal to his own. And he knew this was only adjoining deferred, not forbidden. His movements came more precise. She adapted her angle again, giving him more length to move against, with a maddening little bump at the crown. Each pass was a stroke of pleasure, topped by a press against her knob, crushing it almost painfully, but making her gasp. Then firm retreat all the way back down, his whole length feeling her heated core. The red planet grew and grew, the end of their voyage nearing. He increased his pace. The mess he was making in his basics was lubricating his motions. With the increased awareness, it was almost the real thing, made him almost fear the real thing, how inconceivably intense it would be. He missed a beat. Ray was moaning beneath him, her face as pure light itself. Suddenly, she folded her legs over him, yelped once, and climaxed. He almost immediately fell over the edge, barely managing to keep pressed against her, grunting and whining his relief, while she both pushed and pulled at him, joining her in ecstasy. The ecstasy. It was Chewie who found them just as they were coming out of the landing pod. The exhilaration of atmospheric breach and flight still flushed their cheeks. He looked at them, sniffed the air and shook his head. It worked, he grunted at her. Ray nodded, looking from a waiting Chewbacca to a dishevelled Ben Solo. Ben seemed stunned by his circumstance. It took him a while to raise his eyes to his father's best friend, to see the hope still there. "I'm sorry," he managed to choke out. "I know," Chewie grunted, himself choked with emotions. How you made a fic about dry humping that profound and tender, honestly. You're a fucking genius, Aviendha. I swear. Right, dude, let's get back to this, because you wrote me a chapter in the chat while I was trying to read this story. Right. So, for a start, don't use AI fic generators unless you are using them as part of Project Nightshade. Don't feed the monster, okay? So the AI, so the prompt was the inspiration. So basically you used an AI generator backwards? Is that what you're saying, Lude? Is that you kind of used it backwards? You used the AI generator to make a prompt and then wrote a story from it? I'm really trying to follow. I'm firmly in the camp of AI should be like watching traffic cameras and not trying to art. So yeah, I find this a bit tricky. So there are no strings of words in this that will put together by theft-based autocorrect. Right. There are. So this is your. It is tricky. Like I have a very strict zero AI policy, because that stuff is not only detrimental to writers and writing as a craft, but also in the environment. Yeah. All these dickheads making their holiday cards with AI generation, not realising that to do so is like stealing groundwater and using more electricity than all of the generators for all of the hospitals in the Western Hemisphere. So it's tricky, is to putting it mildly. But yeah. But AI didn't write this. You did. You were inspired by something that you read off an AI thing. Right. I'm taking you. It sounds like Lude was playing with things that Lude shouldn't have been playing with. But it sounds like Lude wrote a story based on a prompt that came up through AI, which is basically AI backwards. I'm pissed about it, Lude. Seriously, I can't believe you're bringing AI to my stream when I'm the fucking poster child for no AI. It's genuinely upsetting to me. Yeah, this doesn't read anything like the way you normally write, mate. No, we're not doing this. Sorry, dude, not today, mate. 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 Sorry. I appreciate that. It's just I'm already pretty upset about something else at the minute, and whilst I normally have the emotional bandwidth to argue the point about AI, I don't have the emotional bandwidth for that today. It's just, this is a no AI stream. Sorry, mate, we're not doing that. Yeah. I'm gonna take 5 minutes, guys. Sorry, I need a minute. I don't know how to pause things on this fucking stream. add that back. Sorry about that. Right. And we're going to go back to, there we go, our planned programming. So that is the, this is not the right one, because I pulled up shower thoughts, and that's not the one that I was supposed to be reading, is it, darling? Is it? Well, I advertised shower thoughts anyway, so sorry. That's not one. Is that right? Just put me in the dustbin. I'm rubbish tonight. I'm so sorry. So because I've practiced and advertised it, and now I'm looking at it and going, we didn't plan this one, did we? Is this what we planned? Did you volunteer this one? I'm not sure that you did. I think I might just be commandeering your work and demanding to read it on the internet. Oh my god. That wasn't our plan, was it? No. What was I supposed to be reading? I've told everybody I'm reading this one. So it was shower thoughts you said, but you said shower thoughts is 10k, and shower thoughts is not 10k. Shower thoughts is 1,643 words. So I'll be brief. Oh, somebody put me in the blender. What do you think the Americans are making for Thanksgiving food? That was going to be my question. Complete is 10k. Shower thoughts. Complete is, oh my gosh. You might get all three tonight. We'll see how we do for time. And if I just explode again. If I explode again, I apologise. Ray takes a well-deserved shower. What could possibly go wrong? Ray's pleasures are simple. Lightly sweetened tea. That fragrant spicy fish soup they offer in the Resistance mess hall. Sleeping in a warm bunk. And showering with soap and water. Fresh, warm, running water. Ray was enjoying a shower when the sound went out in her ears. She thought maybe it was just that she'd gotten water in them while wetting her hair. She squeezed shampoo in her hands, spread it out between them, and brought her hands to her head to massage her now luxurious hair. Only a few months with the Resistance, good food, plenty of water, some luxuries like washing almost every day, and she was learning to relax. There was no stress, the war was still ongoing, but at least she was fed, and she had company. A future freed from regret, now that she knew the truth. And no one, she thought, but not Leia's son, the supreme leader of the First Order. She had to stop thinking about him. Had to stop wondering if accepting his plea could have stopped the war. All I had to do was ask, insist as a condition, and he would have stopped it, I'm sure. But he was so terrifying. She grunted in frustration. Speculation was moot. She had to think of tomorrow's planning while she washed the grime and sweat from her hair and body. She was useful to the Resistance as a mechanic. This was her job. She trained daily from the Jedi texts and notes. That was her future. Only she could defeat Kylo Ren. She ran her hands through her now mid-back length hair, relaxing that her braids were undone. The soapy foam smelled like citrus. The suds sliding down her body, caressing. As she massaged her skull, she felt something join her, gently fingering her curls, rubbing to her scalp, reaching to her scalp, rubbing, soothing. She opened her eyes, afraid of seeing him there, but she was alone. The bond had barely connected them since Crate. Only flashes that both had learnt to shut down, finally controlling it, but this time something about his touch made it tempting to let it carry on. So she let it happen. The massage to her scalp made her sigh. She let her head fall back to enjoy it, rubbing in deep circles, forehead to temples, apex, down the back of her head, and now she nodded forward. The touch tracked delicately down her neck to her shoulders, rubbing some of the day's effort out gently but firmly, tracing her shoulder blades with feelings. Yes, the dexterous massage was also a caress. There was no threat in this moment. She gathered her hair and pulled it forward out of the hand's way, exposing the rest of her back. She felt more than heard some admiration for her muscular form, the way better care was softening her figure. The invisible hands, she could imagine them, moved down her back, gliding smoothly, aided by new lather, unwinding the great muscles that held her up. Strong thumbs followed her spine, reaching over the dips of her hips, over her buttocks, and pressed circles into them. Pain flashed briefly, replaced by her whole lower half suddenly feeling more supple. Ray started to sway, to put her hands up on the wall before her to stay herself. She thought she heard a sigh behind her, was tempted to turn around to reach out behind her, but this surrender was like a gift between them. She was giving him some access to herself, letting him know her. She thought she could shut him out if needed, now that she knew the trick of it. In return, he was caressing her, something no one else could do, just him. Hands moved up to her shoulders again, kneading her more forcefully, as if trying to map out her skeleton and every muscle attached to it. Her arms, her pits, and then from her mid-back they slid forward, over her flanks cautiously. Ray held her breath until the hands cupped her breasts. She remained mostly still, but tilted her head to the side and closed her eyes as she exhaled. Fingers found her nipples, rubbed against them, and they hardened under the stimulation. She was glad the door locked, for she suddenly realised where she wanted these caresses to take her. And they did. The right hand slid down over her belly, dipping a thumb into her navel and travelling down to her mons, petting the hair there, before reaching beneath her to find her folds. Ray gasped softly. The hands retreated. "Oh," she whispered, disappointed. After a moment, the hands came back on her flanks, fresh lather to ease the friction between them, though she could feel her own slick starting within her, pulling. She thought she could hear breathing behind her, thought she could feel it on her back, wondering if he was getting soaked in his clothes, standing in his quarters on his ship, or if he was just as naked as she was. Her breath quickened at the thought. How far should she let things go? This time the hands reached before both of them, behind her, more boldly, sliding down her buttocks, lifting and caressing each in appreciation, then spreading them to reach the ring of muscles between them. Ray tensed and the fingers merely circled the entrance, washing it as it was. In front, the fingers reached between her folds and rubbed at them, gently finding her in a circle. There they stopped, surprised at her own production of lubrication. A soft grunt. Ray opened her eyes and looked down. There was nothing there, nothing visible, nothing she could grab. But she could push against this presence, and so she dropped herself lower into strong, long-fingered hands and spread her thighs, just so the message was clear. Please me. Pleasure me. So they did. The exploration continued, finding and rubbing each fold in front, rubbing against her and behind, making the tight muscle relax in a surprising way. The front hand found and grasped her clit. It was swollen now. Circled it carefully, then pressing down over it, sliding fingers back over her folds, cupping her cunt. Only one finger slipped between them, but not quite where she wanted it. Both hands reached each other. Ray bent her knees to try and sit in that seat they made. They wiggled, they teased. She grunted. "Please," she finally whispered. Slick with soap and desire, a strong digit finally pushed into her cunt, breaching her. Ray gasped with unknown pleasure. "More," she whispered. A second digit obliged, pushing and stretching her walls. Ray ground against them, against the hand, and it squeezed her insides, a strong thumb on the outside holding her in a vice. Ray ground against the hands that held her. Fingers moved within her, now thrusting in and out slowly, deliberately, while her hips gyrated to follow the motion and push back against it. She was panting softly now, feeling a ghost of a breath on her shoulder, and a kiss, and a suck. "More," she moaned. A third finger moved in, stretching her, and Ray started thinking, desiring cock. Was he naked beside her, his cock erect? Suddenly she reached around herself, feeling in the air to find him, but there was nothing. The bond deceived her. She made a small sound of disappointment, and the touch stopped. "Don't stop," she said. So the intrusion continued in and out, the other hand rubbing against her asshole, and she decided to relax it just a little more. One finger slipped in, expertly finding and bypassing each ring of resistance. The sensation multiplied her pleasure by an order of magnitude. Now Ray braced herself against the wall, dizzy with mounting pleasure, as fingers rammed her cunt and now her ass, reaching far inside or dipping out to frot her clit, alternating between motions depending on her noises, the angle of her hips. The sucking at her shoulder resumed, and she knew she would bear a mark. His mark. Kylo Ren's. She thought he would fuck her good and hard, thought he should, but he didn't. Millie moved her hand up to catch her breast again, pinching a nipple, and continued fingering her, her cunt making obscene noises while she herself sighed and moaned, and heard his sucking at her shoulder, a different spot closer to her throat, the sound of it making promises in her ear. She was blind. The beige tile before her disappeared. The universe had shrunk to nothing more than those fingers pumping into her cunt, and the slurping and sucking sensation at her throat, and finally everything came together. And Ray climaxed. It was glorious, held up by those strong hands that slowed their motion to clamp down on her, trapping her in a vice of pleasure, inside fingers adjusting and pushing against a spot that caused her to almost fold on herself. She felt herself throb on those fingers, squeezing with a force she didn't know she had, until they exited and then quickly rubbed at her clit, stimulating some new response. She felt an abundant flow of juices squirt from her, heard a pleased gasp behind her. Saliva flowed over her shoulder in response. And then he was gone. Ray quickly caught herself against the wall, swaying on shaky legs. After a moment, the shower walls appeared again, the water now cold. She rinsed off the last of the soap with the juices of the immense pleasure Kylo Ren had given her. In the mirror, she saw her flushed skin, the unmistakable suck marks on her shoulder and neck. She caressed them. She would have to cover them with her scarf. For now. No robots required. I mean, there might be some required later. Damn. Oh my goodness. I hope so, because after what we just that conversation we just had. Holy cow, Aviendha, that's like, I know I've read it before, but damn, girl, that is fierce. Yeah, it was complete that we did on the one of the ones that corrupted, wasn't it? excuse me. Okay. Remind you that it's just very late here and I'm old. Yeah, because this is the Kyluxy one, isn't it? That's just why we were talking about Kylux. It's, yeah, let's give it a go. We're just going to read like a summary of some of the hottest things that Aviendha's ever written. Oh. That's the problem with having been crying recently, is it makes my throat raggy. Now, you got to tell the universe to stop being shit. Because crying's not good for my throat. You making supper? What are you having? Bet you are. You're a bit hungry for something else, Evan. I'm a bit hungry for something else right now. So we've got to pull the audio for these and turn them into podfics because nobody wants to see my fat ass wiggling my glasses like a 1970s comedy skit. Oh my goodness. Ooh. This is an absolutely lovely manip you've got here as well. That's really pretty. Oh. Excuse me. So, alright. That bit's done. Just call this one. It's just all. We just rename this stream All Aviendha all the time. So those of you who are tuning in and were expecting to have part 3 of Remember Me, that's going to be deferred until Saturday because I'm having some stuff going on. So, complete. Additional tags. Other characters mentioned. Oh, hey, people read you. Just because one devoted Reno on Blue Sky had a paddy, just people are juvenile and don't like their opinions challenged. Other characters mentioned: Raylo Freeform, Rayux, Kylux Freeform, Raylux Freeform, Infidelity, Oral Sex, Anal Sex, Sex Toys, Gay Sex, Threesome, FMM, Angst and Hurt Comfort, Polyamory, Pegging, Fluff and Smut, Bisexuality, Kylo Ben Gets All the Love, Bisexual Kylo Ren, POV Ray, Voyeurism, Menage a Trois, Smart as Character Work. After negotiating for a ceasefire on the Resistance, Ray accepts Kylo's hand. Things seem to settle between them until Ray realises she's not the only one in love with Ben Solo. Kylo Ben is once again torn between two sides. I have to read the notes here because you made me laugh so hard the first time I read this. Being single means the occasional trip into Pornhub for inspiration, and I fell recently into the hashtag gay porn rabbit hole. What I found there was not the professional macho porn of the 90s, but amateur stuff by college-aged men on average, roommates, sports team members, or frat boys. The encounters were often tender enough to have me wonder how boys tame their sexuality growing into men. The result of this curiosity is a Raylux fic. I have no experience with this, only video and the conscious of my own need for pleasure, as well as the phantom pains of trauma. I put this in my fic, giving the men a long-standing relationship of mutual comfort, while making space for Ray to eventually join them. It could be one of the best short fics ever. Have to agree with the note. Ask her. She'll never agree to that. Kylo's voice was low, coming from his little office off the main living room. How do you know? You told me she wasn't entirely inexperienced. How do you know? You told me she wasn't entirely inexperienced. That was Huck speaking, barely above a whisper. She was sure of it. Ask her what? Army, things have changed. I'm committed now. We can't go on like before. But that's not fair. I miss you. Through the partly open door, Ray saw shadows moving on the wall. Bodies reaching for each other, then part. I know. He'd called off the attack on the resistance as soon as General Hux had walked in and seen the situation. Kylo had taken control of the First Order. Hux hadn't been too pleased about it. The army had been his responsibility for years, but he only put up a token resistance when Ren imposed his will on him. So Ray had accepted his hand, and the resistance had gotten away to who knows where. She had been put in comfortable rooms instead of the brig near his own quarters, and he'd started training her immediately. Surprisingly, he had begun with abilities from the light side, explaining to her that he was teaching her by his own experience, and since he had started with Luke, it was the only way he could think to teach her. In addition to force training, he added weapons training. Then he added academia when he realised how far behind she was in writing and mathematics. Then he added arts and culture, music and dance to help her with her fighting forms. Then when it came time to start the dark side, he added philosophy. That's not really what Snoke taught you, is it? She'd asked one day. The concepts he was sharing were conspicuously similar to what Luke had said about the Jedi's hubris. I guess not. Snoke gloated that he had me trained in the light to make me stronger. The tall dark side was pensive. I suffered so much under his teachings. I can't do that to you. The force bond that survived Snoke's death. If he had bridged their minds, the connection was stronger than anything either of them knew. It was profound. Weeks went by, Ray grew stronger. Kylo learned to assume his new responsibilities. His top generals, especially Hux, kept him busy while he carefully steered them toward a less destructive path. With Snoke dead, it seemed like some insanity had died in him. The First Order became less obsessed with crushing enemies, and more with providing a stable structure to the systems they'd already conquered. Many policies softened. Diplomacy became a viable strategy again. Though in all Ray and Kylo, Ben when they were in private, grew closer, until one evening, Ray of Jakku got up from her seat at the study table, undressed, and joined Ben Solo in the shower. The dark side understood passion. The lessons they shared became frantic lovemaking. He repeated his proposal to her. It was clearer this time. The next time they met with General Organa and Master Skywalker, the betrothal was announced. When Ben came back to the living room, he saw her looking at him and turned away. His ears a bright pink. There was something sad about him. You're right, I do need to keyboard up my scene change noise. Scene change noise. I don't like the sneaking around. Then tell her. She'll never understand. You'd be surprised. What do you mean? Do you know something? Has she... The whispers were louder than usual. Ray stood near the little galley, holding a cup of tea out of sight. Are you jealous? If anything, I should be the jealous one. No, nothing like that. She's not stupid, Kylo. She must know. She remembered a round purple bruise she'd caressed on Ben's left inner thigh. She hadn't put it there. If she does, she hasn't said anything. Exactly. Silence. It's totally different with her. It is, but she'll never give you what I give you. The door closed. Ray dipped into the fresher room, flushed and made as if she were coming out. Ben had that look again. He looked guilty. Ray was lying on her back, letting her lover fuck her mouth. She'd spent the last week trying to find out what she could give him to make him happy. But after the initial period of discovery, things had settled and she felt there were things they weren't doing. Things she'd searched for on the holonet, things men do. So while she had one hand holding his shaft so he wouldn't gag her, she had one hand massaging his testes. She let that hand run over his perineum. Her thumb softly grazed the orifice there. He sighed before he bolted away. What are you doing? His eyes were wild, but the sigh had been unmistakable. Ray took a breath. I thought you might like. Aren't you sensitive there? I'm sensitive there. Very. While she'd said it was time to give and take. For all his talk of the dark side, he'd been very conservative when it came down to sex. Not wanting to hurt her, he'd said. He'd given her waves of tocile and pleasure, let her pleasure him with some convincing, but shied of doing anything else. Now she figured was the time to step out of her comfort zone into, she was certain, his. You want me to... He let it trail off. For an answer, Ray rolled onto her stomach, tilting her hips invitingly. Ben positioned himself over her, ran his cock over her folds to slick himself, started pushing himself into her core. It was as fulfilling as ever, and she was tempted to just let him take her like that. She'd been ready for the last half hour at least. But that was not what she had in mind, so she pulled away. No, Ben, the other. He looked a little nonplussed. Have you ever done it? Not actually, no. Then, Crev woman, why would you want that now? They had to think fast. She wasn't about to tell him she'd overheard him and Hux. She wasn't about to tell him she felt him come late home sometimes, his body smelling of fresh soap, his clothes just faintly of Hux's cologne. I don't think you have any idea what you do to me, Kylo Ren. I would do anything with you. That gave him pause. You don't mean that. Try me. She turned around again, ass up in the air. He gave her a smack, laughing. Yeah, no, I don't think it'll be that easy. The smack had woken something else in her. How do you know? Because I know. You've done it before? Yes, I've done it before. But you never asked me. She made a face at him. Well, women aren't really into that shit. But men are. Yeah, men. He shut up so tight, Ray thought she had broken their trust. Well, you've teased me enough, now I want to know more. It was true, he had teased her, laving at her with his tongue. Sometimes he would stray to that other place, sometimes he would rest a thumb near it when he took her from behind. It doesn't seem like such a far stretch that he would just reach in. Yes, well, it will take some work. Work me then. In the officer's mess, she sat down next to Hux. She had no official rank, but no one was about to chastise the Supreme Leader's consort, so they let her in. Madame Wren, to what do I owe this pleasure? The Ginger General was always polite. Ray made sure they were alone at the table before speaking softly. Armitage, how long have you been close with Kylo? There was no mistaking her emphasis. Hux nearly choked on his tea. Pardon me. Hush, don't make a fuss, she whispered. I've overheard you to speak. Well, that was a long time ago. It's all over now. Hux was turning crimson, and Ray hoped no one was seeing it. A long time ago. Wednesday, she counted. Her voice still soft, and Hux finally picked up on her tone. You're not jealous? I'm not. He's not neglecting me. He's just not being honest about it. Do you want us to stop? By his tone, Ray realised if she asked, Hux might just bring himself to free Kylo. Do you love him? Just then, General Nis sat with them, an oily smile spread on his face at the chance to speak with the Supreme Leaders. Well, consort was probably not what he thought of her. Armitage got up. For a moment he just stood there, cup held in long, freckle-spattered fingers. He bowed to her, gave her a firm yes. She looked him in the eye before saying, then I'll see what I can do. She watched him walk away. There was a spring in his step. His back had a nice line to it, she noticed for the first time. She caught the newcomer's watchful expression, speculation clear on his face. General Nis, is it? I hope you don't have any special requests for me, unlike some, she teased, and saw the older man's face fall somewhat. Ding ding. They'd made progress, but it was still too much of a stretch for her. They were lying over each other in inverted positions, him over her, sucking at her fingers, sucking at her clit with fingers in her cunt and bum, she sucking his cock, fingering him while he moaned, finally managing to slip one in and feeling around for his pleasure, while he tilted his hips involuntarily. He stopped himself and she felt that guilt again. He lost his concentration and she hers. He excused himself and climbed off her to go to the fresh air. She wondered if he felt the same guilt when he was with Hux. She was starting to speculate a lot about what the men were doing together. More and more, imagining it. She wanted to see it. I'm trying, Ben, she said when he came back. I don't have the equipment for what you want. He stiffened, then dropped heavily on the bed, making a bounce. You don't need any equipment, he told her. You have everything you need. I love you just as you are. You're my woman. You're the only woman I want. He was babbling. She could feel he meant every word. She reached for his hand and put it on her breast. I know I'm the only woman you want, Ben. She moved her hand down to her pubis. But maybe you want something more? He flushed bright red at that, as crimson as his crazy lightsaber, and she felt him torn again. I don't know what you mean. Ray let out the silence stretch out for a moment, breathing to calm herself. Ben was desperately trying to find balance. How long since you'd last been with a woman before me, obviously? Oh, I don't know. 5 years. Snoke had unpleasant ideas about how to fuck women. Ray didn't like the sound of that, but it confirmed her good impression of Ben Solo, the gentle lover. And now for the hard question. And with a man? Ray, I don't see how that's any interest to you. Ben, I've respected your private thoughts, but they're getting hard to ignore. Silence. Ray broke it. Fine, I've tried to give you what you want, and now I want you to know that I know, and I'm not jealous, Ben. Silence, then. My beautiful desert flower. He started leaning toward her to put his head in her lap. If she let him, he would distract her from this uncomfortable conversation, and she was more than a little tempted to let him. Well, she had spoken her piece. For a few weeks, things were good. Training was good. Troop morale was good. Her contacts with the ex-resistance were good. As war was winding down and more systems were rebuilding ties to form a new alliance, the First Order was delegating decisional powers to that diplomatic organisation, concentrating their military might, defending allies against troublesome neighbours. Ben Solo occasionally didn't come home to sleep. It was a rare occasion, and when he came back, he was incredibly affectionate. And then she started receiving gifts. Fruit. Assortments of various fruits, then fine ciders and teas, books, then an airy black lace tight-fitting long dress. The front opened down her cleavage and up her legs, barely covering her pubis with an embroidered red desert flower. A hooded red-lined black silk cloak covered it perfectly. When Ben saw her wear it, he almost choked. "Where did you get that?" "It seems I have a secret admirer." "Who?" he demanded, suddenly fiery, and that made her laugh. "Don't tell me you're jealous, Ben Solo. That'd be over the top." He immediately stilled. "I suspect it's from someone very grateful," she mused. "That's very sexy for someone grateful. Isn't it? Someone finds me attractive. It's like an invitation." That time he did choke. The next gift was the best gift. It came in a rare wood black and red lacquered box. Cradled in blue silk was a light and dark pink marbled sculpture made of a soft, pliable material. It took her a moment to realise what it was. She took it out. It had a good heft, and she saw a little note was included. "A token of my gratitude for when the nights get lonely." Apart from the beautiful marbling, the thing was incredibly lifelike, but it wasn't like Ben's. It was longer and thinner. It would fit. Kylo kissed her on the forehead before leaving, and she knew he wouldn't be back until the next cycle. So she took the toy out. On Jakku, sex was a risky endeavour. No contraception available, and clean water scarce. Ray had limited her explorations with some of her trimates. And she once played around with a water tube, but it had left her bruised and unsatisfied. When Kylo Ren had found her, she'd been alone for over a year. Now she was alone, maybe one night a week. Squishing the pink rod-shaped object in her hand, she imagined who it was cast from, and put her fingers to her folds. She imagined the original being touched right now. Stroked, maybe kissed. She brought it to her own lips while her fingers rubbed more life into her. The softness was incredible, and she kissed it. It had a faint rubbery smell and an even fainter taste, but the smoothness of it was waking her hunger, and eventually she took it in her mouth, sucking at it, imagining how the owner would moan at her attention. Her throat clenched, and she swallowed it as far as she could take it. By now her fingers had coaxed moisture from her, and she knew where she needed the toy to go. She felt naughty, pushing the toy inside her, like she was cheating on Ben, but knowing he was cheating on her right now, doing almost the same thing she was. Was he on his back like her? Were they kissing? The idea was too much for her, and she soon climaxed. She had to know. She had to see for herself. Ask him. He'll never agree to such a thing. I can't anymore. I want to see, Ray whispered to Hux. I've been fucking myself with your toy for days. What's the difference? He's been like this ever since I've known him. He's Kylo with me. Now he's Ben with you. She realised she didn't know how Hux felt about her. Do you want to? Oh yes, very much. A pause. Should we? Not without him. Ray sighed. You're right. I'll see what I can do. She let him catch her with the toy. He stood transfixed in the doorway for a moment before she patted the space beside her and gave him control of it. If he recognised the shape of it, he said nothing. Having him fuck her with the toy meant he could bend down and lick her at the same time. It was divine, being sucked and filled all at once. She reached for him and stroked him, and eventually she curled up and took him in her mouth. He was a noisy eater, humming and slurping and moaning from her own ministrations, and she could feel him dip and lick the shaft of the toy where it met her body. She released him and flipped on her stomach. "Let's try it now," she asked. She was certainly excited enough. Was he even aware she could see him, alternating from reaming her ass to licking the moisture onto the life cast toy? When he started pushing it into her, it went in smoothly. She'd been practicing. He quirked an eyebrow at her and she nodded. "You're taking him so well," he said softly, like he didn't think she could hear. "I'll take you both," she answered, just as softly. He paused at that. There were a few ways to interpret her response. He got up behind her, and soon she was too full to think of anything but the present pleasure. How any work got done that day is anyone's guess. She received 2 beautiful silk scarves and a bottle of lubricant. It was incredible to totally surrender to him. Blindfolded with the black scarf and hand tied with the red one, the toy became a regular accessory in their lovemaking. Sometimes Ben would watch her suck on the toy while he was fucking her. Sometimes she let herself imagine it was Hugs there inside her while she was sucking on Ben. She got sloppy with her mental shields then, and that almost always pushed her lover over the edge. All 3 of them showed up at the mess at the same time. They sat together. Any other arrangement would have seemed strange, bad enough that the Supreme Leader looked both happy and exhausted. Both he and General Hux were letting their beards grow out. Hux's hair was long enough to flop over his ears. Ray imagined grabbing a handful of red hair and pulling on it. Ben gave her knee a nudge. Now he was imagining it, and she giggled. The hall fell silent. Wild speculation whispered at the far tables. There were some scowls on the older generals' faces, appreciative smirks on the younger ones. "Let 'em wonder," said Hux. The Supreme Leader half scowled, half smiled at that. Conflict still roiled within him. After some hesitation, talks of future plans for the First Order resumed. It was his turn to be tied and blindfolded. He was lying on his back, and she'd been teasing him with her breasts for a few minutes now. It was the only advantage she had over her rival. Tits, as small as they were, Ben appreciated them very much. Blinded, he was gasping for them as she teased his face with a pepper nipple. It was all about his mouth today, she decided, feeding him fruit, letting him suckle on a tit, dripping wine from her mouth to his. She rode his face to orgasm, calling him Kylo as she came, and giving him fingers soaked in her juices, pushing them in far enough to gag him once, till he adjusted himself. She watched, fascinated, as he expertly sucked on her fingers with relish. She was finger-fucking his face. She straddled his hips and took him in. Not moving took a lot of restraint, but she wanted this game to last. He turned his face to find anything she pressed to it, licking and sucking at it like a babe. So she reached for Hux's gift toy and pressed it to his cheek. He turned, he found it, gave it a lick, then turned away. He knew exactly what it was. She leaned down on him and kissed him, and he kissed her deeply. Something inside him was pleading with her, but she ignored it. She brought the head of the toy to her own mouth and made loud sucking noises with it so he could hear her. She felt him throb. She leaned right down close to his face. She called him Kylo again, her voice thick with want. Put the toy between their mouths, looking at the corner of his mouth. She throbbed on him, and he answered in kind. Then he stuck his tongue out at her, a teasing grimace, she realised, and kissed the red-swelled head. Something must have clicked inside his head, for as blindfolded as he was, he decided to show her how it was done. He freed her hand from its silken binds and wrapped it over hers. His mouth opened and his tongue snaked out, circled the corona, and then sucking it in, powerful muscles went to work on the toy. Tendons on his neck stood out. His cheeks sunk in. Ray realised she'd been gentler than he wanted, had needed. He was as noisy as ever, humming as he worked the toy deeper between his lips, and Ray throbbed in rhythm to his thrust, eventually rising and riding him in sync, while he took the whole toy in without gagging. She let it go, rubbing herself to a quick and dirty orgasm, taking him with her. Ask him. Hugs will never agree to such a thing. I just want to watch. I think that's why he sent the lace dress and the cloak, so I'm hidden in its folds. From his mind she saw a flash of a plush armchair with a little table beside it and a lamp, and a glass of fine red wine on it, but it was not in their room. I'll see what I can do. He doesn't realise he's the only one not agreeing to us all being together, she sighed. She wore the black lace dress and covered it up with the black floor-length velvet soft cloak. She wore delicate sandals that let her tiny toes just peek out from the layered hems. She smothered her eyes in black coal. She didn't have to far to walk to get to the General's quarters, but she hurried along like for an illicit rendezvous, imagining Ben taking the same route and feeling the same way before she'd freed him, at least partially, from guilt. Hux welcomed her, made her sit in the green velvet armchair in the corner of the living room with the lamp turned off. She was hidden in shadow. Other lights in the room were diffused. Most of the light came from the starport, where a bright sun shone in a black sky. He poured them each a glass of rich, heady wine and handed her one. Music played. It was Ben's favourite style. He was teaching Ray how to dance to it. He was ambivalent, neither yea nor nay. We're taking a chance here. You look lovely. You have great style. He was a bit nervous. I just want to see what makes him happy. I'll make it worth your while. Hux was a bit nervous. Maybe he'll relax. Why is he so... Snoke? The Jedi, his upbringing? I have no such hang-ups, but Snoke punished him, punished us. That's unfair. The troops don't get such restrictions. The troops were held to a strict code of conduct in uniform. Off hours, polyamory was considered group bonding and good for esprit de corps. The troops were considered animals. Kylo was his prized possession, the Skywalker he'd seduced. I'm surprised he didn't keep him caged. You comforted him. We comforted each other. We still do. Ray reflected on that. It confirmed many things about this relationship. They were closer than brothers. They heard him come in. Armitage stepped back from her, leaving her in the shadows, going back to the little corner where he poured another glass of wine, one for Kylo Ren. The tall, dark, imposing figure was toweling water dripping from... The tall, dark, imposing figure was toweling water dripping from his hair and shoulders, and blood from a cut on his brow. He was wearing casual clothing and carrying his training gear and his favourite training sword. They gave me a hard fight this time, especially Vickrell. He'll be limp. He cut off. Ray saw him straighten and almost turn in her direction. Hux advanced towards him, half-full glass held forward like a peace offering. After a moment, Kylo accepted the glass, handshaking, and took a few long swallows. Why don't you let me take care of that cut on your forehead? Redhead asked in a soothing voice. Kylo nodded. He found a tall stool and sat on it while his friend retrieved the medkit. He remained still and stiff while Hux cleaned the cut and applied a strip of back to patch to it. The General was standing between his knees and looked deep into Kylo's eyes. When Hux put a hand on Kylo's cheek and caressed it, Ray suddenly blushed. When Kylo reached up to press the man's hand to his face, her heart clenched. Over the bond they shared, she felt him tremble. It took all her meditation training for her to stay calm. If she freaked out and left now, she would shame him. It means she wasn't as understanding or accepting of his divided affection as she promised. He could interpret her embarrassment as rejection, forcing him to choose one over the other, and that was not what she wanted. She wanted him to feel loved. She let that love infuse their bond. After a moment, the dark man tilted his face up and closed his eyes, and the pale one leaned forward and kissed him. The first kiss was softly hesitant, and then Kylo's hand moved to cradle Hux over an ear, and he tilted his head to a well-practiced, comfortable angle, and the kiss deepened. From her seat in the shadows, Ray saw her lover with his lover, and currents of hot and cold travelled her body as she watched the men start to remove their clothing, wet kissing sounds alternating with soft sighs and flashes of pink tongues mingling. Ray found herself battling her own conflict between jealousy and arousal. Before her, the men were relaxing into passionate caresses, gentle and firm at the same time. Shirts were coming off, large hands exploring a fuzzy chest, slender ones cupping and pitching muscular breasts. Shoes were towed off, belts came undone. It was Kylo who dipped his head first and kissed the orange trail down the inside standing one's trousers. He pulled them down the front and circled the pale hips to push the cloth down, and perky buttocks appeared, covered in a fine golden down. She saw only a flash of dark pink. Hux's hands moved to tangle in rich dark curls, freeing one round ear, and he held it while the head bobbed before him. Arousal won out. Observing them, Ray wasn't there to take notes. She took another swallow of wine and laid back in the little upholstered armchair, letting the heat grow inside her. Her other hand felt around under the cloak. She found her naked thigh and travelled up to her folds. She was quickly flooding her panties. Before her, one man had his head thrown back and was moaning in soft ecstasy. The other was grunting appreciative, full lips tighter on the pale shaft, neck muscles standing out while shoulders and arm flexed around narrow hips. Head popped out and Ray got a clear view of her rival's cock. She knew it well enough by now. Then it disappeared into her man's mouth, every inch, until it seemed like he was just kissing Hux, where the dark red hair appeared at his abdomen. Both men groaned, and Ray throbbed, almost jerking in her chair. Was it her, or did she see Kylo's eye crinkle with mirth? She flushed a deep and probably ugly crimson. She had wanted to play with fire. Now she was burning. Again the pale length popped out, but this time Hux moved back and Kylo got up from his stool. Pants and shorts fell to the ground. They were both naked before her, tall, muscular bodies just out of her reach. It was still hiding in the shadows, core throbbing on thin, unsatisfying fingers. Next time, she would bring the silicon toy. The men made for the bedroom, pale asses flashing in the dim sunlight. Kylo whispered something to his lover, and the latter giggled, softly slapping his butt. They didn't close the door. It was the kissing that did it, she decided, watching Ben thrust over supine Hux, muscular backs and buttocks caressed and pressed by long, strong fingers that reached further down his body than Ray ever could. Into depths she'd barely started exploring. She replayed all their love-making in her mind as she continued to finger herself. It was the intense kissing, and now the rising moans that pulled her pleasure up her body like a tidal surge. When she climaxed, she heard Kylo's deep bass give a surprised whimper, closely followed by a grunting Armitage, their combined groans going on for long seconds, prolonging her pleasure until she became light-headed. The bodies relaxed, sweat shining on angular planes, and she saw and heard more soft kisses where they caught their breath. She wiped her smutty fingers on the inside of her cloak, got up on shaky legs and exited. She expected him to stay the night. Ding. He decided he liked being bound and blindfolded, and she realised it freed him from knowing who he was with. What? I'm making the scene change noise. Manual scene change noise was not good. I thought try it. Always time for lubrication. He decided he liked being bound and blindfolded. She realised it freed him from knowing who he was with. She had flipped him on his stomach, cushioned under his hips, her cunt dripping warm semen over one of his thighs. She'd reamed and fingered him for long minutes, and while he sighed, blind and helpless to her caresses, she brought the pink-red dildo out and made a show of sucking it loudly, watching his butt clench in anticipation. A few shots of lube, and she slid it out over and under him. He tilted his hips to follow. She pushed it in slowly, and she got the impression he was welcome its length, like it was coming home. He let out a long sigh of contentment, and she leaned down over him to kiss his slowly blushing back. Affection flowed from him. She worked it slowly in and out. She pitched her voice as low as it would go. You're taking him so well, she murmured. But you have to tell me what you want, Kylo. She wanted him to be as relaxed as he was with her as he was with his friend. Keep going up, hon. He raised his hips off the cushion, and she adjusted herself behind him, pushing against the flat base of the toy with her pubis, getting only a token of friction from the motion. She wondered if there existed some apparatus, some kind of harness that would make the play easier. She wondered if she could get to use his own toy on Hux. Kylo seemed to enjoy it. She held the toy against herself with one hand, the other holding his hip for leverage. He was balancing on one hand, the other stroking himself with abandon. His head hung down, his breathing was heavy. She let herself be extra attentive to his pleasure. If this didn't satisfy him, she thought he may not want to try again. Did she want him to be satisfied with only her? He grunted, and she picked up the pace. With only one hand, it was hard to keep a steady rhythm, but when he started to move with her, demanding more, she just kept her alignment, tilting her hips forward. His testes slapped against her thighs a few times before tensing out of the way. He slowed, and she twisted the toy like a vice gently on his side, and moaned more loudly. She spanked him a few times, making him clench and let out a pleasured grunt. She was getting the hang of this, but it wasn't enough. When do I get some? Some of what? Some of what you're getting. Ben hang on their backs, the afterglow slowly fading. Ben reached for the rubbery toy, squeezing it in his fist appreciably. To Ray, it looked like it throbbed. I'd say you are getting some. It's not the same. It almost is. He had that studious air about him, like he was really testing the heft and firmness. But she knew he was deflecting the question. Ben, it's not fair. He sighed. He chewed his lip. She could see him trying to work out a solution, then shy away from the thought. Finally he looked at her. My sweet desert flower, tell me what you want. She felt a spike of jealousy from him, and then he slowly exhaled to control it. He's Kylo with me, he's Ben with you, Hux had said. What did she want? She'd been so concentrated on getting everything she could from him, she hadn't thought of the reasons he might want to keep them separated. Ben, how do you feel about all of this? Again, he chewed his lip. Ray, what we have, you and I, it's pure, it's hope, it's the future. Pure. The Darksider before her, teaching her abilities of the light and Darksider, had still needed their relationship to be from that place of light with him. And Ben flushed. Ben's face flushed embarrassed. I want to be sure that I am the one. What came over the bond confused her. Jealousy, certainly, but over something other, different from sex. The one what? He took a breath, eyes half closed as he spoke in a voice that firmed, and he voiced his most pressing concern. That I am the father. That shook her. The implied commitment. She turned to lay her head on his chest, cuddling him. She took the toy from his hand and put it aside before lacing her fingers through his, laying their hands over his loudly beating heart. Ben Solo was 30 years old. She was only 20. I promise to you, you will be the one, she answered diligently, but I'm not ready yet. Ben said nothing for a while. He nodded. Ray waited expectantly. What I have with Armitage is also special. Here he stopped, pondering his feelings. Ray saw he didn't know how he felt about Hux. Was it dark? Not by what she'd seen. Intense caresses, but still tender. He was a whirlpool of emotions. He loves you, you know, she prompted. He told you? His voice hitched. I asked him. It was the only way I could accept it. She moved her head to his shoulder to watch what she could of his face, his prominent profile. He squeezed her hand. He took care of me. Helped me survive Snoke. A tear rolled down his temple. Ray watched it fall to the pillow. He helped me survive you, he added with a smirk. Ray gave a soft snort. I don't want to make you choose, the scavenger from Jakku said. I just want to share it. But it's part of my past, of my darkness. It doesn't feel like darkness to me, Ben. And it's not the past either. It's not. He conceded. Oh, so many emotions. Chapter 2. It's the fact that you can put this level of like detail and like profound personal growth and emotion and strength into 10,000 words of threesome porn. Just like like you can feel the way that he's torn, that his guilt and his confusion, and it's just in just such a desperately profound way. It's magic. It's your magic. That's what it is. When she got back to their quarters after class, she found a simple note. Join us. It was in Ben's flowing, assured calligraphy. She showered, put on a thin lace dress, but only a thin line of kohl under her eye, again hidden in the folds of the flowing cloak. She strode to General Hux's quarters, crossing only a pair of guards who stepped aside to let her pass. One murmured something she didn't understand. The door opened for her and she heard the music. Dressed in loose clothing but barefoot, the men were dancing. The same dance Ben had taught her for their wedding. She was beginning to better appreciate its melancholy and grace. Now she was getting good at it from Ben's appraisal. She made for the chair but caught her husband's eye. Remove your cloak, take the glass of wine, sit on the stool and wait. Okay, is that because there's no quotation marks there. I kept it in the narrator's voice, but it's not, is it? That's Ben speaking, but he's speaking through the bond. Right, sorry. Just give me a sec. This is why rehearsal is good. Remove your cloak. Take the glass of wine. Sit on the stool and wait. No bad quotes. I'm confused. So, is that Kylo's voice or not Kylo's voice? Or is that... I want to get it right. I'm going to record this for you one day. Ben turned his attention back to his partner. In the background, a gas giant planet, banded in rich, colourful clouds, swirled in places with monstrous storms. Back and forth the men swayed. Armitage's eyes closed, letting Ben guide him in the space cleared for the dance. Held close now, foreheads touching, he seemed blissful. They parted for a moment as he was led in a circle around his dark friend, cued into some elaborate steps Ray was still learning. They were in perfect sync. They must have been dancing together for years. The song ended and they parted. Kylo came to greet his wife. They kissed, a bold kiss that asked and answered a question at the same time. The next song started and he moved aside, revealing a shining hux to her, who extended his hand and he took it. A thinner man, Armitage Hux preferred longer strides, and it took her a moment to adjust to his style. He tested her knowledge of steps, and when he found her better known ones, relaxed into the music. He whispered softly in her ear. Relax. I've never done this before either. She understood he didn't mean the dancing. Kylo was sitting on the tall stool, drinking wine, watching appreciatively as his wife and his lover learned each other's moves. He said nothing. This evening had been months in the making. No Hux suggested more flowery steps to her, tapping her toe to cue her to weave her leg through his, and then bringing her close. Her body leaning on him at an angle, he spun her around in a tightening spiral to gather in his arms, placing her hand over his heart, where she felt it beating wildly. Now kiss. The deep bass spoke. Not quite an order, not a suggestion either. He would be in control of the encounter, and both had agreed. Ray looked into smiling, ice blue eyes, cheeks blushing, and they closed as Hux leaned down and kissed her. She closed her own, her heart beat loudly, as loud as the heart of the tall man who now held her, as loud as the heart of the man watching them together, saying nothing more. Ray let desire overcome her. Her hands moved up to an angular shoulder, into short, straight hair, the colour of sunfire. Lips parted and a strange tongue teased at her. She met it with her own. She trembled. He trembled. But then he embraced her closer and just held her for a moment. This time she was caught between arousal and guilt. He must have felt some of it because he whispered softly. It's all right, Ray. Take your time. She felt him raise his head to look at Kylo. Something passed between them. You can stop any time, but, he added, I have been dreaming of knowing you. Ray had a flash of her own dreams, of the fantasy she would play in her mind whenever she took the toy out, when Ben used it to cast on her, on himself. Heat flushed her whole body. She reached up again and pulled Hux down to a much deeper kiss. This time boldly exploring his mouth, tongue reaching further, teasing into hers. He made an appreciative moan. She felt a heat flash from where Kylo was sitting on the stool trying to calm his own spikes of emotion. The music continued playing, but the dancing was finished. The tall red-haired man's hands started exploring her body, tentatively, and she wondered if he'd been with a woman ever. You're so tiny, he murmured, and she realised the size difference must be disconcerting. He was as tall as Ben Solo, only thinner. His hips were narrower, his waist smaller, but she was much smaller than him. Don't worry, She fished around for a reassuring word. Solid. There, that should put him at ease. They called her Desert Flower. Desert flowers were tough. She felt him smile against her mouth, and long fingers encircled her arms and squeezed, gauging her muscle. He made an appreciative sound. Months of training and proper nutrition had put meat on her bones. Her hands travelled the long muscle down her back. If he had danced with her without paying attention to her strength and flexibility, he did so now. He grazed over her buttocks, brought one hand up to the front and one to her flank. Hesitantly, he found a breast. He made a small sound at that, and Ray felt his excitement, like he'd found a gift. He would worship her body. Her core throbbed at that. The bond throbbed at that. She broke the kiss and tilted her head so he'd kiss her jaw and throat. He leaned down immediately to taste her skin. She eyed her husband and saw him, very still, eyes half closed, feeling her as much as seeing her, most probably feeling his lover's emotions as well, letting things happen. She ran her hand in Hux's flame-bright hair again. It did flop over his ears now, and pushed it down a bit. He took his cue and kissed down over her collarbone, down her cleavage. He paused, then nosed into the fabric, pushing it aside. If Ray had not been wearing the tiny underwear she was wearing now, moisture would be running down her thighs. Being discovered for the first time an eager lover was something almost maddening with emotion. When he found her nipple, he licked it shyly before taking it into his mouth. It was like he was discovering cake. How would he react to thought of Hux rooting around in her large package of hair to find her core suddenly was too much, and she swayed on her feet. He caught her, straightening. "Are you all right?" "Yes, you're so enthusiastic," she murmured. "Like Ben," she added, not sure how that would be received. He laughed. "Am I? Everything is so different," he mused. "I'll be careful." Now Ray was sure Hux had never been with a woman. She looked at Kylo. He snapped out of his daydream and found a little cushion he put before the plush green armchair. It looked well worn. "Sorry, I haven't lost my place. I'm just trying to figure out who's talking." She looked at Kylo. He strapped out of his daydream and found a little cushion he put before the plush green armchair. It looked well worn. "Oh, why don't you have a seat, love?" He pointed, then shook his head when she made for the cushion. "The chair. The cushion is for Hux. Here, Armitage. Make your supreme leader proud." Hux kissed her again, hand caressing her jawline like it was made of fine bone china. The smooth skin seemed to fascinate him as well. "You're young," he said, "but not so young. You'll never grow a beard." "I have one," she teased, "but it's not on my face." She heard Ben snort a laugh while Hux chuckled. Sorry, the reason I was confused is because of the way love is written. Normally indicates an English accent. So it just threw me a bit. "Take some clothes off," she answered. "You too, love," she added, only half looking at her husband. The men stripped down to their underwear while she took another swallow of liquid ruby from her glass and reclined in the love chair. She caught the thought from Ben. Ray breathed heavily while tall, lanky but fit Hux knelt before her, resuming his caresses, but this time starting from her knees, up her thighs. He leaned over to reach her cleavage again, still fascinated by the soft mounds of flesh that held real nipples, and she felt the abundant orange chest hair brush over her thighs and stomach. She caressed down his shoulders. It was like caressing a pet. His beard was rougher. He was a different animal than Kylo. Caressing his stomach muscles along the way, she unclasped the desert flower closure of the lace dress, freeing both breasts and revealing dark red mesh underwear, barely concealing the lush jungle underneath. Hux was still suckling at her like a desert-thirsty man. fondling the other breast with an open hand, just gently squeezing and releasing. She thought of a litter of kittens she'd seen on Jackie, still blind and pawing at their mother's teats as she fed them life-giving milk. She felt a rush of affection for the orphan general and caressed his head softly, almost purring in contentment. He interpreted the caress another way and released her tit. He tilted his head and looked at the tiny cachet sex Harry was wearing, and looked at her questioningly. She nodded encouragingly. He put a long, freckled-covered hand over her palm and fingers, following the curve of her mound. To him there was nothing there, not even testes. He ran fingers over her, then his thumb passed over the dip of her core, and Ray's breath hitched, squirming in her seat. The slow teasing was making her pulse, and he must have felt it as he thrust his thumb more firmly against her, rubbing a bit of friction from the damp fabric onto her. "That is a lot of moisture," he stated, before bringing his thumb to his face to smell and taste. She sighed. She wanted to scream. They heard Kylo chuckle, and both of them looked over him, and he murmured, "Sorry, carry on," like nothing extraordinary was happening. But she could see his hand resting over the oversized erection in his underwear. He must have been rubbing himself. "That devil," she thought. He winked at her and took it out. Both her and the man kneeling in front of her made mouth noises for the first time. Carlo realised the advantages of having them both with him. He swallowed, but he waved his hand at them. They looked back at each other, and Ray leaned forward to kiss Hux again. She took his head in her hands and probed him deeply, letting affection flow to him. Lust was changing into something better, deeper. When she released him, he was breathless. He pushed his nose into the apex of her thighs like a man breathing the fragrance of an inviting repast. A few deep huffs of her musk, and he undid the lace tie at her hip, casting the fabric aside, and dove in. Ray fell back, her body squirming to give better access to the very hungry man eating her flesh. He had a very muscular tongue and knew how to push it in. Ray could only hold onto the chair arms to keep from climaxing too fast. He made quick work of her juices too, cleaning her up and rooting for more. When he realised that the little knob had been sliding under his nose he latched onto it, and Ray cried out and had to hold him back. "Oh, that is very sensitive," she told him, laughing. "Oops," he fell back. "I'll show you how it's done," came a deep bass. "Well, you know," Hawks looked up at the bit as the bigger man moved in close. "Actually," piped in Ray, "I think that was quite well enough." She pushed herself up onto an elbow. Both men looked at her. "I'd like to ride this red ore back into the ground." She got up off the chair, prompting the men to stand. She gave one meaningful look to Kylo, grabbed Hux's hand, and made for the bedroom, murmuring, "We'll see what all the fuss is about." She made Armitage Hux lay back on the bed while she let the robe-like open dress fall to the floor. From the corner of her eye, she saw Kylo Ren standing still near the green chair, looking at her naked form. At them. Under the dark fabric of his underwear, she could see the new man was ready for her. She put one knee on the bed and reached for the cloth, pulling it off in one smooth motion. It was all gaggly legs and arms, the golden down covering his body, turning to a blood red the nearer it got on his loins. Surprisingly, the scrotum was bare. She sat close to him and had a look at the thing she'd been using for weeks on herself without the man attached to it. The shaft was pale, but the plum-like corona was a bright pink. This was definitely the original, though. She recognised every vein and bump on it. She looked into her lover's eyes, and a cord passed between them. She was joining his couple, and he was joining hers. Kylo would join them in time, there was no doubt of this. But for now, it would just be the two of them. It took a few minutes to caress the furry body, so different from the hulk of a man she'd grown used to. She let his hands roam over her own while she kissed him here and there, tasting him for the first time, after he'd drunk of her so lavishly moments before. She bent over him and took him in hand. He was a lot firmer than the toy, and he tasted a lot better too. heat and rose. Mindful of her mate now sitting in the love chair watching them, she kissed and licked the pale length like she remembered Kylo doing, palming broad testes boldly, and taking the whole thing in, now hearing both men groaning separately, enjoying her play. He reached for her breasts again and played with her hair, pet her bush. She was glad he appreciated the differences so well. "You're so beautiful," he told her softly, looking at her like she'd come to save him. Something like gratefulness flowed from him. "Thank you," she answered. Neither of them had demanded a sacrifice from the other. Both of them loved the same man. So she straddled him and took him into her body. A bit longer than her husband, he bottomed out quickly, as she had to find an angle to accommodate him. He was very surprised by the bump at the end. He made her keep a slow rhythm. Very slow. He pulled her close to his chest so he could kiss her some more, so he could kiss her forever, like he'd wanted nothing more than to kiss her for weeks. It was breathtaking. She broke the kiss and straightened over him. She was ready to find her climax. She rode on him, fingers brushing through an autumn forest of chest hair. She picked up speed and pushed herself back to caress gonads, and then further out, arching back over him, while his hands slid over her hard stomach, from cupping her marvellous breast down to rubbing her lips where their bodies met. "You're taking him so well," they heard from the doorway. "Come kiss me," she told him. Kylo Ren walked in shedding his underwear. All three were naked now, all toned bodies, pale and tan, dark-haired and gold, furry and smooth. Her hair flowed over her shoulders. Ren's hair was tied up in a bun. Hux's flopped in his eyes, and he pushed it back to get a better view of the triad forming over him. Kylo kissed his wife lovingly before climbing beside her. He felt his lover's arm wrap up around his hips to bring him close. The dyad looked at each other, the dark side hesitant. Ray, sitting astride a throbbing Hux, nodded assent. Kneeling, Kylo eased himself into Armitage's waiting mouth, both men groaning. The sight and sound was making Ray pulse even more, though she waited, letting the view enrapture her. Kylo leaned forward, placing himself for better access, and in doing so, reached for her sweet, sweet kisses. She throbbed again and heard an ecstatic grunt escape Hux's working mouth. His hand caressed her thigh and pushed down on her hip. "Move, please." So she resumed her ride. It had a domino effect, one body communicating pleasure to the next body, and then Kylo moaned into her mouth. One of his large hands supported Hux's head, the other reached to her neck, half pulling her close, half supporting himself as they swayed, finding a rhythm. The music was still playing, and they followed in sync, two couples, now a trio. Surprisingly, it was Kylo who climaxed first. He tore away from her kiss, moaning loudly, and Hux let go of her hips to wrap both arms around his hips, greedily drinking him in. She watched in fascination for a moment. It triggered her own orgasm. She arched back to ride it and pushed Armitage over the edge, who freed Kylo and cried out, "Ooh, oh, fuck!" She felt warm spurts flood everything. Everything went white. She was on the thrasher again, overhearing the men. Sorry, having the bride won't like this. We won't invite him. That's not what I meant. I'm kidding. Kylo, how do you feel about this? Another pause. Ray could feel her man searching his soul. Better, less guilty, certainly. I mean, I never expected this. I didn't either. I was just hoping she would accept us. I never really asked. She did. You did. She seemed open-minded enough. Had to be, to join you. I figured asking was worth the risk. You were the only one with any doubts. I felt torn apart. Ray heard motion from the bed. A few kisses, a whisper she didn't catch. I know, murmured Hux. She took a breath before walking back in. They were curled up together, spooned. Kylo made as if to move away, thought better of it, pressing further into Hux's back, patting the space behind him. Hux pat the space in front of him. Everything was going to be all right. She sat at the foot of the bed, looking at them both, not choosing a side. Kylo moved to lay on his back. Hux turns towards him, reaching an arm across his stomach. They were sleepy, but Ray wanted to know more about them. Tell me how it started, she asked. Oh, maybe a couple of years after you joined us. Hux looked to Kylo for confirmation. A few weeks after that crash, I saved you, then you saved me, and then you made your intentions clear to me. Ray had heard about an on-planet crash involving the two of them. They'd survived through Ren's immense mastery of the Force. I did. Took you long enough. I was still grieving Ty. And the first year after Snoke took me in, it had been intense. Indeed, you were getting quite a reputation with the ladies. Until Snoke changed the rules. That you stopped seeing anyone then, that told me a lot about you. Better things. And then you just got sad. Kylo said nothing for a moment. When did Hux save you? She asked her husband. Many times, he said softly. Each time I resisted Snoke. Once I was so beat up, Armitage had to carry me to the medbay. He stayed with me for hours, visited every day. Took my hand and held it when I cried. That was our first kiss. It was. Kylo turned to look at the golden man beside him. He smiled. The first of many. Hux looked at her suddenly, starting another tale. And then I had to pick you up after the scavenger here cleaned your clock. There was some snark in the words, but no malice. To be fair, I was not having my best day. Silence fell again. It was a terrible day for all three of them, for everyone. Hux looked at Ray again. You should have heard him after that. The scavenger. She's so powerful. She's just like me. If I could just have her with me, on and on, he wouldn't shut up about you. He paused for a moment, then softly continued. I knew then. Kylo had been listening to his friend, emotions passing over his face. Guilt, but also interest. Hux was about to say something he hadn't said before. You knew what? Prompted Ray, her curiosity equally roused. Then our relationship had changed. Kylo frowned, guilt moving over his features again, but Ray spoke before him. I'm sorry, I didn't know. Now Hux said his piece. It's not your fault, sweetheart. Nothing in the galaxy could have stopped you two coming together. I think not even Snoke. I'm just glad to be here now. Here and now, repeated Ben Solo like a promise. The desert girl and the general both looked at their dark lover. Ray winked at Hux, lay herself down beside Ben, and grasped an arm to pull him over her. All about Army. Your problem. Just be careful you two don't crush me. Ben Solo covered her with his immense body, carefully entering her with a familiar strength that made her tilt her head back in renewed pleasure. Armitage got to his knees and grabbed her foot. He suckled her toes, tickling her softly, and then placing himself to kiss his lover's back between his shoulder blades, and then up his neck until Kylo tilted his head back to return the kiss. Ray felt Ben's pleasure grow as he took and gave, filling and fulfilled, finally complete. That's one of the reasons that the scripting process, that we went through when I showed you the annotated stuff before, can be really, really important for something like that, where you've got an intense back and forth. Whereas as you're reading it, your brain will sort it out kind of as you go, but you need to kind of get ahead of it when you're doing the voices. Oh, that's such a grand story. It's so bloody tender, and it's, the starch coming out of Hux towards the end there, as he's kind of reminiscing about their relationship. It's just, it's so soft and it's so profound and it's just lovely. Yeah, I can make a script of it. If I don't know what I was doing with it, then I can make a script of it and things like that. So I'm genuinely tempted to record you that one, because it's just so lovely, and it's a lovely little box of a story. Thank you for our all Aviendha extravaganza. It's been grand, and for keeping me company. And yeah, I will put while I'm uploading this to YouTube, I'll put the form back out. Excuse me. And see what we can do for Saturday. A bit more formal. And not everybody gets their sexual fantasies read aloud with an English accent. Or in this case, 2.5 English accents. So I think... yeah. I think Domhnall Gleeson would probably scowl at even the voice that he does for Hux being described as English. That whole family, it just sounds, the Gleeson family, they're just insanely talented. It's like, how are you all so talented? Yeah, thank you, hon. Yeah, it's taking my mind off brooding. Doing my best Darksider impression tonight. Thank you, sweetheart. Alright, see you Saturday.